dissertations that will shape our, like, how we think about campus policing and be a really, I think, a really necessary tool in the struggle against campus policing, so that we can know how and why these departments exist, so that we can abolish them. And I'll turn it over to them now to talk about that history.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much for having me here. I really appreciate your time. So as Lucian said, my name is Grace, and I'm working on a dissertation on the history of campus police professionalization. And I have a pretty quiet voice, so let me know if you're having trouble hearing me at all. But we're going to be talking to you a bit today about the history of campus police, and specifically the history of their surveillance practices, which I think are relevant for student organizers to learn about how these forces have suppressed protests and activist efforts in the past, and how these patterns continue to the present. So I wanted to just share a little bit of what I've learned through my research, and in doing so, I'm especially grateful to the people who are working on campus police history at the moment, and especially the works of people like Devarian Baldwin, Roderick Ferguson, Dylan Rodriguez, and all the incredible abolitionist organizations and collectives that will be sharing their work later on today. So the first official campus police were formed in 1895 at Yale University, both as a means to control student behavior and police the boundaries of campus using violence and anti-Black racist profiling practices. And in the over 125 years that campus police have existed, they've caused egregious harm to students and local residents alike, especially targeting Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other people of color. They first began properly professionalizing as the increase in student-owned cars in the 1920s changed the landscape and traffic flow of the campus, but this was happening along a bunch of other factors. And then again with the post-war boom in student enrollment in the 40s and 50s. Campus police forces then rapidly increased in response to the unrest of the 60s and early 70s during the student protest movement, when administrators saw campus police as a way to avoid calling in outside police and the National Guard by using their own officers to prevent large-scale protests and rebellions from happening in the first place. Campus police's reputation as rent-a-cops kind of belies the massive, often full-service departments that they've become, often with powers of arrest, military-grade weapons, and up to statewide jurisdiction. On account of administrators' desire to use campus police to handle discipline in-house and avoid negative media attention, campus police have been historically less likely than municipal police to arrest students for some offenses, like underage drinking in some circumstances. But it would be a mistake to use this fact as evidence that campus police are less dangerous than city police overall. Rather, I think it would be more accurate to say that campus police patrol differently and in ways that are especially designed to suppress student organizing. In many cases, campus police have paid far more granular attention to the political lives of students than their city counterparts. And due to their close proximity, campus police are often the officers best suited to closely surveil students' movements and correspondence with each other. Moreover, some campus chiefs noted that their Keystone Cop reputation actually aided their surveillance efforts because students did not think they were capable of waging such operations. So campus police's ambiguous legal status, their ability to keep largely private records, and their institutional affiliation with powerful universities allowed them to experiment with a wide range of surveillance tactics. And these tactics have played a significant role in the suppression of protests through the invasion of students' privacy and promoting tension within groups. So I'm going to talk briefly about the campus police surveillance tactics that were developed in the early years of the student protest movement. Because campus police are tasked with trying to prevent protests from reaching the point of outside intervention, officers viewed surveillance as a way to monitor student organizing and cause fracturing within groups, like I said. And they did so by using undercover agents to pose as students and paid student informants to infiltrate groups as well. They tried to cause rifts between groups and sabotage organizing efforts, and students suffered from the stress of trying to identify these agents amongst their friends and peers. Campus police frequently partnered with the FBI and military intelligence to share information and kept extensive files on individual students and campus organizations, compiling information gathered from searches of student rooms, stakeouts on and off campus, lists of license plate numbers that they took from parking lots, and transcripts from wiretap calls and electronic bugs that they placed throughout the campus. They also took photos and videos of protests to be able to identify and arrest students later. And many of these practices continue to today or have shapeshifted, and they've become even harder to detect because of new surveillance technologies. My hope is that a greater historical awareness of campus police surveillance practices might make them easier to identify in the present, as well as provide yet another argument for the abolition of these forces. Towards that end, we've also put together a short list of readings and resources on campus police history that will be circulated after the event, along with my email address in case you have any problems finding or accessing them. And if there are any other readings that you found useful and would like to have them included in this list, please feel free to write them in the chat and I will add them. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jalile because her work is incredible and surveillance is literally her expertise. So thanks so much.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Grace, so much for that amazing overview. So I'm Jalile. I'm working on a dissertation that explores the intersections between the history of higher education and the history of the carceral state. So I'm going to pick up where Grace left off, which is the 1960s. So the 1960s and the 1970s were a very transformational moment for campuses across the country. Yes, universities had been a site of protest before. In the 1920s and 30s, we saw active socialist student organizations engaging in strikes. In the 40s and 50s, we saw significant protests that pushed back against the university's involvement in imperial projects. But the campus protests of the 60s and 70s were more visible than ever before. They included a demographic of students that had previously not been allowed on campus. And they called attention to the ways that racial inequalities were reproduced within and beyond university space. So there's a lot of historical forces at play here, but the nation's broader embrace of law and order pretty much triggers the creation of a modern internal university police force in universities where it did not previously exist, and it catalyzed the expansion in places where it did exist. So prior to the 1960s, the most common thing was for universities to rely on a handful of unarmed security guards to patrol university grounds. However, in the late 1960s, a series of fatal encounters between students and police sweep the nation. Examples include the 1967 interaction where the Houston Police Department fired thousands of shots at Black protesters at Texas Southern University. In 1970, when the Mississippi Police Department opens fire on a woman's dormitory at Jackson State, killing 2 students and injuring 12 others. Kent State also happens in 1970. And it's in the aftermath of these deadly encounters that universities realize that when they call in the municipal police, when they call in the National Guard, when they call in external law enforcement, they have no say in what happens. They have no say in the degree of force that's used. They have no say in the deployment of officers. They can't dictate when they leave the university grounds. And this is a new moment for universities that had previously enjoyed a lot of autonomy. So they realized that they were giving up a lot of control when they called in law enforcement. This results in a couple of different paths, but in most cases, it ends up in the same place, with universities beginning to construct police departments that more and more resemble municipal policing. Many believe that they could harness the knowledge, that they could harness the expertise found in universities to refine policing in such a way that it could create a more sensitive force that could work with college students, that they could create a force that was more in line with a community policing model, a model that could allow protests, but not too much, a model that could delineate the bounds of that protest. So this brings me to the first of 3 points that I'm going to highlight today, and I promise I'm going to be very quick within my 5 minutes. First is this idea of universities and their research contributing to punitive policing practices. This goes beyond the development of crime theories in criminology departments and the development of data sets that result in predictive policing, but it also extends into the many other disciplines, especially in STEM. So for example, in the 1970s, there was a lot of discussion about using chemistry professors and chemistry departments to test confiscated drugs in collaboration with the broader war on drugs. The use of undercover agents in classrooms, in residence halls, and protests continues through the 1970s, in the 1980s, and through today. So in other words, using the university infrastructure, not for the liberatory purposes or for social justice purposes, which is often an idea that universities like to hold on to, but rather using that infrastructure to contribute to an array of policing tactics. The second element I'd like to highlight is the shifts in titles of university police forces that occur from 1970 to 1990. So in the early 1970s, administrators are engaged in an effort to create a softer security force. They start off unarmed, they start off small in number, and they take the title of public safety. But as scholars of policing know, law enforcement is not a passive, detached agent of the law that simply enacts what the law says, but rather they are active agents that help craft law, that help craft policy. So by the mid to late 1970s, many university police begin to ask for a change in title. They turn away from the title of public safety and want to be called police. They want to attain the legitimacy that comes from that title. They want that legitimacy from students, faculty, and staff, but also from broader law enforcement. From 1986, this is just a quick statistic here, from 1986 to 2006, there was a 62% increase in the use of the formal title of police department rather than security office. So there's a lot of things that come with the title. The last element I want to draw a little attention to is the connection of university administrators to campus police departments. And this is particularly important for organizers, whereas our conversation is focused today. For organizers, it's important to keep in mind that even though administrators play down their relationship with these police forces, campus police report to university administration. That relationship is very close. There's an exchange of intelligence that often goes beyond the university. And since the 1980s, it has become increasingly more common to have police use cameras to identify protesters, to track movements, and then have the deans and provosts bring students in after the protest. So understanding the structure and the hierarchy might be helpful in thinking about who and where to address your questions and your visions for reimagining campus safety. University stadiums and spaces can't, for example, be used for ICE detention without the approval of university administrators. That's an important thing to remember, that that's not a decision made necessarily by the university police department, that's the university. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Alejo, pronouns he, him. Alejo is a graduate student worker at the University of Michigan and is an organizer with Michigan Abolition and Prisoner Solidarity. He is also a co-producer of Rust Belt Abolition Radio.
Great, thank you, Yoli, and Lucy and Andrea, Flaco, and Grace, and everybody else that helped put this together. There's like 91 people in here, which is way more than I was expecting. So this is awesome. And it kind of speaks to the moment I think that we're in too, that this is just sort of like taking on certain force in campuses and in different spaces throughout, and also peripheral to the university. So hopefully together we'll get a chance to think and talk and also maybe strategize a little bit about what it might mean to think about an abolitionist university. So I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about the two organizations that I'm a part of and the kind of organizing that I do there, precisely because they're actually not university-based collectives. And that's kind of one of the main points that I want to bring forth is that, of course, I'm a rank and file member of GO 3550, which is the grad student union here at the University of Michigan that went on strike. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I want to briefly talk about the two collectives that are not university-based collectives that I'm also a part of. And so I'm a part of them by virtue, I guess, of my abolitionist practice and not by virtue of being a grad student worker, right? So, I say that because I think as the abolitionist comrades say, and we'll probably say today, we have to kind of study and struggle within the university and against the university, but also struggle beyond the university, right? So the two collectives that I currently situate in my abolitionist practice, Rust Belt Abolition Radio, RAR, and Michigan Abolition Prisoner Solidarity, MAPS, both emerge in an effort to kind of support and sustain, in our limited ways, of course, in capacities, both imprisoned rebels and abolitionists within and outside prison walls. They both emerged in the wake of, and with a certain fidelity to, I think, one of the most extraordinary events in recent history of the prisoner resistance struggle, which is the 2016 prison strike, which maybe some of you might have heard of. So on September 9, 2016, prisoners across North America went on strike. And that's America with a K, as George Jackson would say or write it. The date, of course, is significant. September 9 is the day of the Attica Rebellion in upstate New York, 1971, which also took place 2 weeks after the incarcerated Black Panther revolutionary thinker, George Jackson, was murdered in California, right? And he was the one that developed a theory that fascism was already here in America, right? And it was here in the form of prison, right? He was murdered 2 weeks before September 9, 1971. So September 9, 2016, hundreds of prisoners here in Michigan and across the United States went on strike, basically shaking prison walls and rattling its cages across the United States. In the Upper Peninsula, which is northern Michigan, in a prison called Kinross, conditions related to the 2008 crisis, something that we read quite a bit about, which is the recurrent crisis of racial capitalism and the state, kind of determine the conditions for struggle within prisons as well as conditions within universities, right? And I can talk maybe a little bit about that later. But comrades there went on strike, and of course, they started congregating in the prison yard, and they started chanting Black Lives Matter, equal work, equal pay, and slowly but surely, their call grew louder, and more people started coming out until they basically shut down the prison facility, right? But it was actually kicked off by a few kitchen workers going on strike, right? Of course, as it usually happens in these situations, these people that stood up against the brutality of incarceration were repressed. The state deployed basically was a SWAT team, emergency response team, and they were put in administrative segregation, which is a euphemistic name for solitary confinement for almost a year. So in the wake of this event, this heroic act, in Michigan and beyond Michigan, sort of Rust Belt Abolition Radio as a movement building collective, media collective, podcast, sort of emerged as a sonic space of encounter to try to undermine the walls and cages that contain many of us in different ways, differentially, of course, and are strangling all of us in different ways, of course. We've done many interviews. You can look at our website. We have a documentary also, an audio documentary about the 2016 prison strike here in Michigan. And MAPS, Michigan Abolition and Prisoner Solidarity, also emerged alongside this process to support the organizing efforts of those incarcerated inside, particularly here in Michigan. And we continue to support their efforts today. We managed, after a year of supporting them in solitary confinement, the Kinross rebels, we managed to actually get them out of solitary confinement on May 1st, 2017, and continue to support them after, in spite of the state's continued retaliation against them. More recently, we have supported prison rebels also as they continue to try to sustain their struggles inside in the wake of COVID. As we know, prisoners have mostly been directly, perhaps mostly impacted by the pandemic. Hundreds of prisoners have died. Over 100 prisoners have died here in Michigan in the wake of COVID-19. And as we know, as public health researchers in our own universities have said and demonstrated, prisons themselves are a public health crisis. And not just for prisoners, right? Not just for prisoners, but for all of us. Prisons have consistently ranked at the top sort of COVID-19 cluster lists. They're literally petri dishes of disease. And of course, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore says, they're also vectors of premature death. They are basically the sites where the virus is right now reproducing on the daily, right? But as we know, another cluster of disease, at least here in small Ann Arbor, have been universities, right? So this, I just want to say, sort of reiterate that I think that we cannot think about abolitionists organizing within the university without also thinking about abolitionists organizing beyond the university. And this is essential, I think, for any abolitionist, right? I think the many kind of material relations that carceral society extends, these relations are reproduced and produced in large part through the effects of these institutions, right? Prisons, police, but of course also universities, as we just heard. So that means that studying, understanding, and ultimately transforming these relations is the task, I think, of the abolitionist university. But precisely because these are relations, right? They're not simply isolated facts. To think about abolitionists organizing in the university is also to think beyond it, right? If not, we are basically reproducing the carceral logic, right? The logic that reifies relations, that is, turns relations into things, isolates, captures, contains. So I hope that today we're going to be able to kind of address this problem, or at least think about it together, this question and the tensions that it brings up, what it might mean to think about an abolitionist university. For me, I think an abolitionist university is is a university that strikes. You might see here a graffiti found, just a random graffiti found during the 10-day or so strike here at the University of Michigan last fall. So what does it mean to say that an abolitionist university is an abolitionist that strikes? Is that a university that strikes? Sorry, I'm switching abolition with university. Interesting. An abolitionist university is I just did it again. Is a university that strikes, but it strikes back against policing in all its forms, right? Not just police, as I think Dylan Rodriguez also emphasizes. Strikes back against policing in all its forms, by which I mean the multiple sort of apparatuses of capture that contain us, which is to say fascism in all its forms, right? As George Jackson, which I just mentioned before, points out. Now, having said that, I think that the question kind of becomes, to what extent can universities be or become a site of experimentation for abolition, right? Not only, of course, the site, but a site, right? Can they be turned into small abolitionist laboratories, as it were? For example, we can show that by abolishing campus police, we can actually create a safer campus, or at least a safer community, right? I think we have to be able to show that, right, in some way. And I think we can also just sharpen our tools, right, and our other tactics for what abolition might mean. So that's a proposal. I think in spite of what links there are between the university and this broader carceral society, we can maybe perhaps turn the university into a site of experimentation. But only by sort of understanding and studying and transforming campus police and policing in all its forms, by which I mean abolishing it. This to me kind of opens up a broader question about what kind of university we desire, right? So it's not just a question about turning the university into a site for experimentation, but it opens up the broader question of what kind of university we want, what kind of university we desire, and ultimately what kind of society we desire, right? I have to say though that this of course comes with lots of problems. For those of us that didn't cut our teeth organizing exclusively within the university walls, there's actually a lot of mistrust of the university, right? As maybe many of you know, quite maybe justified rage at the university from surrounding territories and people that live within the university, right? So my claim is that if we don't forge the kind of anomalous alliances beyond the university walls, we're ultimately going to fail our abolitionist project more broadly, right? So again, the university can be a site of experimentation for abolition, only insofar as we're able to kind of forge the vital anomalous alliances beyond its walls that thereby sort of destabilize and puts into question the university as such and carceral society more broadly. And this is not just an injunction, this is not just to be provocative, but I literally do mean that if we think of carceral society as a kind of society that mutilates relations, that captures and contains us, and that's precisely what actually makes us much more vulnerable, right, to what Ruthie Gilmore calls the punitive state's catch-all solutions, right? By being sort of captured and isolated in this kind of reified world of the carceral, we're actually much more vulnerable to the punitive solutions they offer us, right? Which, as we know, they're not solutions at all, right? They just want more security rather than safety, right? So we know that. We know that that's what makes us vulnerable to the punitive desire and the police that reproduces and sustains racial capitalism more broadly, by which I mean prisons, police, and property, right? So I'm going to say once again, abolitionist university means that it must go beyond itself, beyond the policing of its borders, and policing in all its forms, right? And that means, of course, creating the vital alliances with folks outside the university, including not just surrounding communities, but prisoners and others. So I was saying before that the abolitionist university is a university that strikes, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the strike here at the University of Michigan in September 2020. September 7th is the day that we went on strike. which is Labor Day, which is to say that federal holiday they give us instead of doing what everybody else in the world does, which is remember May 1st as a great International Workers' Day. And my light just turned off. Well, let's leave it off. So we went on strike on September 2020, September 7, 2020, and it was a historic strike, not only in terms of the history of the union, since it hadn't really gone on strike since the 1970s, but also because it was an abolitionist strike, or at least it became an abolitionist strike. The slogan for the strike, which sort of expressed our demands, was a call for a safe and just campus. A safe and just campus. In many ways, I think these demands articulated, I think, two forces of the conjuncture that we're in, right? On the one hand, the COVID pandemic, and on the other hand, the mournfully riotous summer of 2020, which we saw basically the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many other Black lives taken by legal and extra-legal forms of policing, but also the resistance to those forms of premature death, right? So the union, I think, brilliantly articulated these two set of demands. One are the COVID demands, which sort of included robust testing and other things like universal option for remote teaching, extension to graduation timelines, childcare subsidies, and other things. And articulated those with anti-policing demands, right? Which included basically disarming, demilitarizing, and defunding campus police, right? So we actually demanded a 50% cut in the police budget, which should be actually redirected to community-based initiatives, right? As well as cutting ties with ICE, right? So this articulation, right, between safety and justice, what it actually did was disarticulate safety and security, right? This cannot be a safe and just campus with campus police being present, and it cannot be a safe campus with workers being exposed to COVID, right? Midway through the strike, we thought we were going to be in a general strike. It was a very hopeful moment. Residential advisors, which are like undergrads that work in the university housing, faculty allies and others, and including also dining hall workers, sort of came together, and we thought that we were going to go on a general strike. It turned out that didn't happen, but it was a very exciting moment. And then the university sort of filed an injunction. So it threatened us, right, through another element of the carceral state, meaning the courts, to incarcerate us and put us behind bars, or at least those that were at the top of the union, right? So that's how they ended a strike, through the intimidation of the carceral state, right? Which of course includes prosecutors and courts, right? Now, what we want is, I think we've set an example in a certain way for both abolitionist struggles in universities and for labor movements more generally. And I think we've set, in a way, a kind of huge precedent for what is acceptable within bargaining negotiations, right? That we can struggle against policing and surveillance within bargaining, right? And that's acceptable even to go on strike for. Unfortunately, what we got was a fucking task force. And I realize this is now being recorded, but I guess I said it. But I think that the biggest thing that we want is that we kind of fractured the kind of punitive common sense. And this has opened up all sorts of discussions and conversations within the university, but also within comrades throughout North America. And it seems to me like these little cracks, as the Zapatistas say, are the beginning of perhaps something else. So with that, maybe I'll close, and I'd love to hear you all and your thoughts.
Thanks, Alejo. That was fantastic. I'll now turn it over to CUNY for Abolition and Safety, which is an anti-racist student coalition pressuring CUNY to divest from policing in prisons to invest in Black students' well-being and safety. We're joined today by 3 students: Caroline Schwab from City College, Dave Basnett from Hunter College, and Onyekachi Okeke from Hunter College as well. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much again to our comrades for the invitation to speak today to you all on this really important conversation. And I think the discussion that Grace and the other, I'm sorry, I don't want to mispronounce your name, I think, but did on the history of policing on campuses is really relevant to the context of our university. And so we are CUNY students. I'm joined today, like what was mentioned, with Caroline and Onyekachi, just a few members of our larger team of CUNY for Abolition and Safety. But the history of policing, especially on CUNY's campus, is really relevant. So for those of you that don't know, CUNY is the largest urban public university in the country. It's housed to 275,000 students across our grad schools, our senior colleges, undergraduate colleges, and our community colleges. And it's often regarded and revered as the social mobility engine of New York City, right? And with that comes a lot of different nuances when we pay attention to the history of CUNY, and especially the history of policing on our campus. So Mayor Rudy Giuliani, when he was mayor, he was a racist and a white supremacist mayor that really did not like CUNY as it was existing. So prior to Mayor Giuliani's movement, CUNY, our university, existed as a free university. It was open enrollment for everyone to sort of come and get their education. But Mayor Rudy Giuliani didn't like that statistic now allowed more Black and brown individuals to take classes and to pursue their higher education in this university. And so because Mayor Giuliani didn't like that, he sort of moved to having CUNY not be free anymore and making it difficult for students to pursue their higher education when it wasn't before. And so that's really important to notice, because it was the second that Black and brown student populations increased in CUNY that CUNY wasn't free anymore. And we have comrades at Free CUNY that do incredible work working to make CUNY free again. But this is an important moment in our history as a university, because at this moment, students started protesting. They were occupying spaces within different universities. We have over 25 different campuses across New York City. They started taking space. They started occupying classrooms and lobbies. And this is the exact moment that university policing was introduced as it exists in our university today, to specifically stifle student protest and student movements. And we've seen that relationship get more difficult and more abrasive over time, especially in the wake of 9/11, when the NYPD's Muslim surveillance program was surveilling Muslim citizens across the city. The NYPD specifically targeted Muslim student associations of different CUNY colleges. So they planted spies in these faith organizations. For Muslim students associations are large gathering places for Muslim students to talk about faith, to practice their faith on their campuses, right? And to plant spies in this university just connects to this larger mission that they have. And this was in partnership with the university administrations and in partnership with the NYPD and the new form of campus security and public safety that was born out of this. And so we've been really paying attention to all of this history and all of this work that so many have been drawing attention to, because at the same time this history existed in our university has also been an incubator for abolitionist ideas. Audre Lorde was a alumna of Hunter. Ruth Wilson Gilmore is actually teaching at Hunter at the CUNY Grad Center right now. So we've been a space, an incubator for abolitionist thought, yet simultaneously have this relationship with the NYPD, one of the largest police departments in the country. And so we sort of over the summer, like a lot of organizing groups were born in the wake of the George Floyd protests after he was murdered at the hands of the police. We sort of formed as a collective of students across our 25 different campuses, really trying to understand our university's relationship with the carceral state in New York City. And what that means is really putting a microscope under the investments of our university, a predominantly Black and Brown university, a working class university. We were really paying attention to how they were funneling money as an already underfunded institution. We were really shocked that they would be funneling money right back into the carceral state, right back into prison labor, right back into these systems that sort of they are working hard to teach students to work against. So it was a lot of hypocrisy that we detected. And at campuses like John Jay, which is one of our colleges within our network, ICE actively recruits students to join the force, and there's a significant undocumented population at John Jay College, and to see ICE at a career fair inviting students to join, right? It's such a bizarre sort of function that's happened at our university, and this was all exacerbated and allowed by public safety as it exists. And so we formed as a group with three main goals: to invest in Black safety and well-being, to divest from prisons, and to divest from policing. And a lot of our strategy and our organizing this semester has really been guided by movement elders and movement scholars that have done the work before us. We based all of our work on a really research-driven emphasis from SNCC and the Southern civil rights activists that work so hard to create frameworks to think about how to research and really fundamentally ask the correct questions to our university. And so we really put up a mirror against our university and we asked them, is this how you want to be using your investments? Is this how you want to be sort of teaching your students or showing your students what you value in the city, and you value profits over people, right? And we wanted to address all of those things. But at the same time, we were also met with, like the last speaker just said, task forces upon task forces. And it seems like to be the answer for every student uprising and every student movement is a task force to suppress that movement. And so we sort of recognize that there was no place really anymore to try to work with universities. It was now important to connect ourselves to the larger defund movement that's happening in New York City, and to the mass clemency movement. And so we collaborated with Release Aging People from Prisons, which is a huge campaign in New York City right now, especially in the wake of COVID-19. And we're connecting ourselves to the different sort of relationships that we've been forming. And we're also lucky to connect with movement scholars and movement elders like Erica Huggins and Angela Davis, who recently just endorsed our move to rename a building at one of our colleges after Audre Lorde, rather than another multi-billion-dollar investor. And so all of these things go to say is that our primary concern is the relationship between public safety and our university right now. And I'm going to pass it off to Caroline to talk a little bit more about how this also ties into our work with CoreCraft, which is one of the largest prison labor industries here in New York City. So Caroline, please.
Yes, hi everyone. So I'll take it right from where Dave left off. As he mentioned, CoreCraft is part of the Department of Corrections in New York State. And CoreCraft makes $53 million a year, but its employees and incarcerated people who work for it make between 16 to 65 cents an hour. And so in the wake of the summer, CUNY states that they stand united against racism and injustice, but yet we discovered at the same time they actively support the prison industrial complex by investing in CoreCraft. So we at CAS kind of acknowledged this and wanted to take a deeper dive into CUNY's investments and sort of expose to them how you can't claim you support your predominantly Black and Brown student population while simultaneously investing in the very profit incentive of policing and the carceral state. So two of our amazing members, Diana and Gus, spoke to incarcerated people, did a series of interviews about their conditions and the just abuse that goes on as being essentially forced to work for these, for CoreCraft. And so from this research, we crafted a letter to the CUNY chancellor to get, trying to get him to divest CUNY from this awful industry.
Caralho, tô com uma raiva, bicho.
And so, sorry. So from at this point, we've been in the process of working with both CUNY groups and community organizations to try and gain just this unified momentum to get CUNY to divest from this industry. And so we've been going at it for a couple weeks now, and we have over 80 groups who have signed on to this letter, and that includes CUNY student organizations as well as New York City organizations, and actually out of the city as well. And at the same time, we've been circulating a petition for individuals to sign, which I'm sure one of our members will drop in the chat, to also pressure the chancellor to divest from this group. And something we realized that's important as we've been doing this work is the concept of having just the most unified group and movement we can have. So in our work, we work closely with the amazing CUNY chairwoman who's a student. She basically explained to us in a meeting that we will not be able to get any of this work passed through if every CUNY student government needs to also be on board. So at the same time as we have all these groups organizing, we've also been getting students to pressure their student government to pass resolutions along with us. And the CUNY USS as well passed unanimously a resolution to get CUNY to cut ties with this industry. So that's been sort of our main effort. And so we hope to be sending this letter next week. And we are kind of understanding of and preparing for sort of the inevitable response of the CUNY administration. So like I mentioned, we've just been working as hard as we can to be sort of this unified force moving forward. And I also just wanted to mention how in our letter, we are also calling for Governor Cuomo to grant clemency given COVID in prisons. So we've been working closely with the Release Aging People in Prisons campaign and with their incredible work on elder parole and fair and timely, just sort of as this effort to address CUNY's role in the prison industry from as many angles as we can. And so, like Dave said, we're very research driven, and as such, we understand just the extreme complexity of this issue and how it just touches so much of our university, both physically in that the tables, chairs, desks, and even the soaps in our campuses are made by incarcerated people through Corecraft, and systemically as well in that the actual members of the institution aren't using their privilege and power to call for clemency and other things that are so desperately needed in this moment. So I wanted to keep my section short. That pretty much ties up our efforts with Corecraft and prisons. And I'm going to pass it off to Onyekachi, who's going to talk about our working group with policing and the defund movement.
Thank you, Caroline, for everything. Just thank you so much. Okay, so something that we do at CUNY for Abolition and Safety is that we are involved in investing in Black safety. So what we did was that we mobilized African diaspora. I'm so sorry, please forgive me. Mobilized African diaspora. We made a survey to ascertain what does public safety look like to CUNY students. And I know that one of my fellow members will drop the survey in the chat. And so we wanted to see how did public safety look like to the students, and what did the effects of having police on the campuses, what did it do to the students, like how did it make the students feel? So some of the results that we saw was that it create an atmosphere of hostility. It's also pushing like an aggressive, like it's the police tend to be very aggressive with the students. And so in contrast to that, we asked them, what did public safety look like to them? So they said that public safety is creating an environment where there's food provided for the students who can't afford it. Also, there's, excuse me for 1 second. Oh my gosh. There's also enough resources for the students in case they can't afford them, so they can have access to everything. So that was That was what was involved, right? And then we want to say that for the administration, it's not enough to just put out a regurgitated statement, because we've noticed that that especially during the summer.
Welcome to Uganda.
That during the summer, the administration, they were putting out statements saying, okay, they sympathize, they understand about everything that's going on, but it's not enough just to do that. You also have to commit to visible efforts to create tangible change. So we are trying to push for administration to divest from cops on campus, because it's creating a hostile environment for especially Black and brown students, who are the ones who are getting affected the most. So yes, and the survey is going to go in the chat now, and we just thank you for this. Okay. And I'll pass it to Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Anyakachi. And just to close out our section here, I think Alejo talked about it a little bit, but about what abolitionist university looks like and what that looks like to us. I think a lot of times abolitionists and people that believe in prison and police abolition are often regarded as destructive and as cynics and people that just have so much hate in their heart. And I think that's one of the, I'd always want to push back on that idea, because abolitionists are brave in an optimistic, in a radical optimistic way, because it takes a lot of radical optimism to dream and to think that another world is possible, to think that a different university is possible. And so again, we're so grateful for the invitation to speak today, and I will pass it back to Lucian.
Thanks for that. That was really great summary of all the different work that you're doing across your campaigns. I'll pass it off now to Flaco, who's going to introduce the Underground Scholars.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Can you all hear me okay? You hear me, Lucian? Hey, how's it going? I'm Ryan Flaco Rising. Great intro music. I'm from Underground Scholars Santa Barbara. I'm a formerly incarcerated student, just transferred in from San Diego City College here to UCSB. One thing I want to highlight, Alejo had touched on it. Being a formerly incarcerated individual, I went through the school to prison pipeline. I was predominantly locked up my entire life. At the age of 12 years old, was incarcerated in the juvenile hall system, went to YA, had a very poor education. Basically, my education from middle school and high school was packets with the answers in the back in juvenile hall. So I really wasn't trained or groomed for higher education. Well, my story, to fast forward it, in 2013, I participated in my first ever protest. And it was in New Folsom State Prison, and it was the California Prisoner Hunger Strikes, where I starved myself for 33 days and was willing to die in order to get programs to uplift my mind and uplift all the incarcerated scholars and all the incarcerated individuals' minds, and gain that knowledge to just uplift each other. And we were willing to die for it. We were willing to sacrifice our lives so that nobody would have to suffer the harsh conditions of being incarcerated. Since I've gotten out in 2015, I've been, really going hard in higher education. I was able to receive 43 units towards my associate's degree in New Folsom State Prison after that hunger strike. And so to fast forward it, now I'm a part of the Underground Scholars Program, but the Underground Scholars Program has been there for me since the day I got out of prison, uplifting me. And one thing I want to highlight is that most of us who are incarcerated, we're not too familiar with abolition. We're not, it's not something that's taught to us. So what we've designed here at UCSB is we've designed a program that's uplifting formerly incarcerated students and really showcasing to them abolition, showcasing it through political education, through political theory, through readings, that honestly in prison, you're not allowed to have, like George Jackson. You brought up George Jackson, being incarcerated in the California Department of Corruption. You can't receive George Jackson books. You can't receive Angela Davis books. You know, these books are, we can't get them, you know, and if you do get caught with a copy of them, you go to the segregated housing unit. So now we're working hard to uplift formerly incarcerated individuals, and we have, and like what Alejo was touching on, was we're using higher education in these university systems and their structure to mobilize formerly incarcerated individuals. Currently here at Santa Barbara, there's only 4 formerly incarcerated students. 4 out of 30,000 students. You know, it speaks volumes to how we're so isolated and cut out of our communities, and how we're just so oppressed and suppressed, you know? And so we've really been developing a program, the Underground Scholars Program, which is creating a pathway for the formerly incarcerated and system impacted individuals into higher education. We are building a prison to university pipeline through recruitment, retention, and advocacy. Like I said, I didn't know nothing about abolition until like 3 years ago. And I've been out of prison 5.5 years now. And I've been organizing, and I've been really trying to uplift other formerly incarcerated state labeled gang members to understand that we need to come together as one. And one thing that I want to highlight as well is that we need to bring all these social movements together. We're so spread out. We're so separated and divided in our own movement. And I feel once we merge these movements together and we start to center around the real, which I feel like I'm an anti-capitalist now. I feel that capitalism is the reason why these structures are in place, the reason why the police exist, the reason why we're experiencing all this divide and conquer, and so once we get to a point where we can dismantle capitalism, the rest will follow. Prisons are only in place off of our tax revenue. They take our tax revenue on every commodity that we purchase, and that is what upholds prisons. That's what upholds cops. You know, so we're seeing something right now in this pandemic where capitalism is not functioning. It's collapsing all around us. All these businesses are collapsing. And I feel this is an abolitionist moment. And if we can all come together as one and really not allow the divide and conquer of capitalism to separate us and merge all these social movements together, we can tear all this shit down. And so the Underground Scholars Santa Barbara, we're really centering our attention on formerly incarcerated voices. We're really uplifting those voices, as we really believe that it's those closest to the problems who are closest to the solutions. And one voice that is really not uplifted and seen in a lot of these spaces in higher education is the formerly incarcerated, the one with the lived experience. And so I'm going to introduce you to a very powerful individual who inspires me, and I really look up to. His name's Albert Nava, and I would like Albert Nava to unmute himself and share his story of overcoming the carceral system through higher education. And then after that, we'll have MJ, and then I'll close us out. Go ahead, Albert. You got your mic working? All right, I think Albert's mic isn't working. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and pass it to MJ and let MJ come in and talk about. Okay, yeah. I hear you.
My mic is working now.
Okay, all right, Albert, go ahead, bro.
What do you want to hear about, policing or how I started Underground Scholars?
So I would like to hear about your story of the 3 strikes, being getting struck out, and then after you got out, after serving that time, and just kind of take us into higher education and where you're at today with establishing the Underground Scholars at UCSD.
Oh, all right. What happened to me is that I was going to City College back in '96, and it was Chicano Studies. So I was like trying to change my life around and all that, and You know, I was working at NASCO at the time. I got laid off from NASCO, so I decided to go to City College. So then after that, the professor had a film trip right here by the stadium, the old Catholic church, about 200 years old over here. So I remember it was on a Saturday, you know, I woke up with a mean hangover, you know, and I had a cure, so I drank a 40 ounce. I know it's disrespectful to go to class drunk, you know, but I had to drink, man. I was like alcoholic. I'm straight alcoholic. So what happened was I go to the shopping center to buy me a brand new shirt because I had a faded one. I had a like, Tom Craft. It was all faded, with a black one with a pocket. So like I'm at the wait for I had to use my boombox a little loud, and the security guy got mad. You better lower that music or get out of here. So I'm stubborn. I don't want to lower it, so I took off. I met the class at the church, the City College, Chicano Studies. Here I am, 1996. I got 2 strikes, and I decided to steal a shirt. You know what I mean? So like I got $32 in my pocket. I didn't want to spend $10. I wanted to buy more beer. You know, like, so I decided to steal a shirt instead of buying it. You know, like so I got 3 or 4 shirts real quick, so they, you know, if there's any undercover, they ain't gonna notice how many I picked. So when I went to the dressing room, I put the new one on, got the old one through it under the wastebasket next door, thinking they're only gonna search my room only. So what happened is they searched all the rooms, they found the old shirt, they busted me. You know, so now I'm facing 25 to life for petty theft. You know, so by law, because petty theft is only worth 6 months in the county. But if you got 2 petty theft, by law, that's a felony. So that's the one that DA say, oh, he has me now, you know what I mean? So, because he got 2 security guards lying for him, you know. My college professor from Chicano Studies said that I was drunk that day, you know. But since it was a student that told him, the judge struck that, said it was hearsay. You know, so like I'm thinking to myself, man, they got me now, you know. I know that DA wanted me because in 1978, I committed assault with a deadly weapon on a cop. You know, it was assault with a firearm. It was his firearm. I took his gun. So you know, like I know that DA wanted me because of that. You know, I'm a threat. You know, they think I hate cops. You know, because the cop said I shot at her twice. You know, but when I was really just trying to shoot his tires, you know what I mean? I was like going in a speeding car. You know, that's a good one. And then so when I was a girl was speeding, I shot the 2 bullets. Her boyfriend got mad. The boyfriend go stop. So I was running with a cop's gun. You know, like before you know it, I was hiding in somebody's shack for 3 hours. Where the helicopter was all flying above me. You know what I mean? So I'm like, oh wow. So I decided to come out at night and I escaped. When my friends picked me up, boom, I went to TJ with my family at TJ, and I'm kicking it there. And my wife is pregnant, and I just came back, decided to turn myself in. So I thought this case I got 6 years. That's all I got. You know, if you do commit a crime like that, shooting at a cop, you're gonna get 25 to life. So what happened back in '79? They gave me 6 years. I went to Tracy Gladiator School. You know, so the first day I came out to the day room and some paisa hit me up. Hey, you gotta be a norteño, sureño. I said, what the hell are you talking? I was thinking, what the hell are you talking about? You know? I got family that are norteños. I got family that are sureños. You know what I mean? I got a big family. I got family that are cops. You know, so like I'm mixed. I'm mixed. You know what I mean? I'm international.
How many
So,
how many years did you end up serving on the life sentence for the 3 strikes?
I ended up doing I was in Pelican Bay at the time when the United States Supreme Court decided that it wasn't cruel and unusual punishment. So I'm Pelican Bay, right? I wake up one morning, I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing here? You know, I'm right here with the worst of the worst. I'm in Pelican Bay, I'm B-Yard. After the riot, when the gunner shot the Southerner in the head. So I'm like, I'm coming out. They kept me in the hole for about 6 months, you know, when I didn't deserve it. I just got there, you know what I mean? So then I get out to the yard, and then all the Mexicans, black
Hey, talk about how many years you spent in total, and then talk about your transfer into college and where you're at today. Kind of guide us a little bit. So how many years did you do?
I was
17 years.
I did 17 years. I was in Lancaster when the law
Right.
When the law changed.
Right.
So when I was,
When
when I
did
was
you
in
get
high
out? When did you get out? Talk about when you got out and went to City College.
oh yeah, I got out in 2013.
Okay.
So then one day the professor, Chicano studies, told me, hey, you know what, man? I got this organization is giving out scholarships. So he told me about undergrad scholars. So that's when I got in touch with Violeta in 2013. So Violeta goes, you know what, I'm gonna get to UC Berkeley, you know. So I'm all excited, right? I'm gonna get to UC Berkeley. So, but I decided to put UCSD as a backup just in case I get denied. So I get denied at Berkeley, but then after all come down, man, because the consul, the advisor at UCSD said they're not even looking at my application. You know, so I'm thinking, why not? You know.
And where you at now? And talk about the
And now
program that you're.
I'm graduating in June with a bachelor's degree, but I think I'm gonna extend it for another year because I don't think I feel like passing these classes right now. So I'll probably be here another year and finish my 2 classes that I got left.
Okay, cool.
So after I get my 2 classes done.
And how is the underground scholars being established out there? Can you talk about the program and then we'll pass it to MJ.
In 2017, I wanted to start underground scholars in 2017, but I was in touch with Violeta. So I got Irina from Cross Cultural Center in touch with Violeta. But Violeta, at that time, she had a goal. She just graduated from UC Berkeley. She went to become a lawyer now. So what happened was Jose came in the picture from Compton. So me and Jose met one day, and I told Jose, you know what, let's start this, man. You know, underground scholar right here.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't want to be an officer. I just want to be a member.
Yeah, that's
so
good.
Jose became the president, and I became a member. And I started doing all these community colleges right here, inviting transitions, rising scholars. I invited all these schools right here, you know, formerly incarcerated.
That's right.
And I'm teaching them. I'm teaching them how to cross and rope because that's what I did. I crossed the rope.
Okay, that's
from
right.
City College.
And how has the underground scholars program impacted you and your journey?
Well, I learned a lot because in all these events that I threw already for underground scholars, you know, I've been teaching these people that they can take classes here at the same time they're going to City College or Southwest or whatever. And none of them has tried it yet, but there'll be one day that one of them will try it.
That's awesome.
I know it takes a lot of courage because everybody hears, you know, that, you know, UCSD got a lot more homework than San Diego State, you know.
Right.
I crossed the road San Diego State. As a matter of fact, I was going to 3 colleges at one time. I was going to City, State, and UCSD at the same time. So when I went to the office, the guy laughed at me, right, Flaco? The guy that, you know, like the advisor for what do you call it, to get in here. He goes, that's right. He goes, he ain't gonna read your application. I go, why not? He goes, because your GPA is 2.9, man. You got one of the lowest GPAs there is. I go, is that right? He goes, well, what am I supposed to be? He goes, 3.3. I'm going to Raza Center all bummed out, right? I go like this with my head down, like, you know, like, I was like, oh, look, feel like ready to cry, right? So Geraldo from the Raza Center, he goes, don't trip, but you know what? You're a NECA member, you're every scholar member from City College, you're students of power, you start students of power, and you know what? They're gonna read your application, and they're gonna like take you just like that. Watch. And you know what? I see my like letter. You know what? You're in UCSD. Now I graduated right here. All the staff members right here love me because I'm throwing all these events for formerly incarcerated students.
That's right.
Changing lives.
Thank you for sharing your story. We appreciate you and all the labor you're putting in. Your story is very impactful and very inspirational. And I just want to let you know how proud we are of everything that you're doing to uplift other formerly incarcerated students, other formerly incarcerated community members. You're showing that we don't need the prison system. We don't need the police. We don't need none of that. All we need is each other. We need each other to uplift each other. And I truly appreciate you coming on today and being vulnerable and talking about everything that you spoke about. I'm going to go ahead and open up the mic now for, go ahead and mute your mic, Albert, for MJ. And MJ's going to go ahead and unpack what's going on at Santa Cruz. And I want everyone to know, like, the Underground Scholars is in an expansion. We're expanding across the UCs. And we also have, you know, CSU, Project Rebound. Big shout out to Project Rebound. I know Andrew Wynn's on here, and there's 17 CSUs that have Project Rebounds for formerly incarcerated students. So we're developing a whole culture of formerly incarcerated students and uplifting them and really enhancing their understanding of abolition and what it's going to take to create and instill abolition into our community and our future lives. You know what I'm saying? So I'm gonna go ahead and open up for MJ, and MJ's gonna go ahead and unpack some things, and then I'll jump in and close us out. And I appreciate everyone joining us today, and I appreciate everyone's insight and everything that's been said today. Thank you so much. Very grateful.
Hey, what's up? Thanks, Flacco, and thanks, Albert, for sharing. How y'all doing? My name's MJ. My pronouns are they, them. I'm an underground scholar at UC Santa Cruz. Recent graduate of UC Santa Cruz. I graduated last quarter, but now I'm the community outreach coordinator with the Underground Scholars chapter at Santa Cruz. We are a fairly new chapter. Like Flacco said, we are a statewide initiative. We have it almost at every single UC, the USI program. And at Santa Cruz, we're really focused right now on outreach and recruitment, on, you know, carving our space for our community members, building, you know, community with our allies and partnerships with departments, you know, basically outreaching to our students who are impacted and compiling and building resources for them to help, you know, them succeed in the UC system. And we're also forming relationships with also the programs that serve formerly incarcerated and system impacted students at the community college level, because we are really focused on the transition process. We want to support students at the community college level and help them with their transition process into the UC. So right now we're really building all that up, and at the same time, you know, building exposure to other students, you know, giving them exposure, students at the community college level, or students who are currently incarcerated, or students who are, you know, coming out the system and, you know, they just want a little guidance or something. We're trying to expose them to different things, you know. I realized too, I didn't really say a little about myself, give you a little context of what I'm bringing to the table. I'm formerly incarcerated and system impacted. I grew up in the super predator narrative. And I grew up, you know, poor and in a community that was heavily criminalized and policed. I spent from age 11 to 19 in the juvenile criminal injustice system, and then into the adult system at 25. I'm currently, I was arrested while protesting over the summer, so I'm currently dealing with some legal issues again with the system and with policing, with the campus police. I was targeted in a hate crime and they did nothing about it. So I'm also addressing that. And that is literally a display of how the police are not there to protect us. And, you know, and I'm sharing that because I'm really emphasizing the importance of our lived experiences and the expertise that we bring to the table on the topics that many people are just, you know, many people have their heart in the right place, you know, but I feel like right now abolition is a hot topic, right? And like Flacco said, like even myself, you know, I didn't really even know what abolition was before, you know, coming and going into a higher education. I, you know, grew up gangbanging, that street culture, that was my mind, that was my mindset. But at the same time, as a non-binary trans person, like I've always been on the marginals. So it allowed me to, you know, see through this lens of not complete conforming to a culture, if that makes sense. But when I decided to, you know, take the steps to change my life, just, you know, for myself and for my homies, and, you know, leading by example and, you know, starting to heal the wound that we all have been, you know, subjected to throughout the whole, you know, inception of this country, and the white supremacist politics that are rooted in all laws and social norms. That's when I really got exposed to other things. And like Flacco said, you know, social theory, whether it be, you know, critical theories, theorists of like today and in the past, you know, people who actually have lived experience. I really, you know, working in these spaces, I really like, you know, come to, you know, understand with my own, you know, lived experience and perception. I am thankful that I'm able to have a critical lens and break down how it is in how we're viewed in these spaces, and how people are in allyship with us or advocating for us, and how really seeing the harm and trying to shine the light on the harm, because I know some, most people, their heart's in the right place, but for myself, I'm going to speak for myself because, many different people have their views of abolition, and, some people aren't abolitionists, who are in the spaces. And, we are all in the Underground Scholars, we are welcoming. We want to provide the knowledge, not just like academia knowledge, but, social knowledge, street knowledge to our students, so that they have the knowledge to make their own decisions and their own character judgments on, people and what their intentions are in these, in these spaces. But for myself, I'm gonna speak for myself on abolition here, and someone who is system impacted, who grew up in the system, who's literally still dealing with the shit today, even though I've gone in this other space, kind of crossed over from one world to the next, now having a degree in all this, and I'm still seen as a thug, as a criminal. So my whole thing is, it's not just dismantling these systems of oppression at the systemic root, but it is also transforming the social norms of acceptance in why we are still here where we are since slave patrol was established, how we have evolved with the times to have modern policing in many different forms. And what that entails, this is my own, thought process here, is we need to start looking at what is accepted, what is tolerated, what is seen as equity, and the bounds in which people are seen as deserving their humanity. And also the way in which we treat those who cause harm and those who endure harm. If we really look at the history of this country and how we're addressing these issues, we see that it's really focused on addressing harm by control and punishment, and it's fueled, the control and punishment, it's fueled by implicit bias. It's fueled by the prioritization of commercial interests, of properties, of ideologies that are rooted in colonial traditions. The way in which knowledge, the structure of knowledge, it is rooted in colonialism. All of this, I studied history of consciousness. I don't know if y'all know what that is. It's social philosophy. Basically, all knowledge is made up. If you really think about it, it's all made up. It's all constructed off someone's ideologies. It can be deconstructed and reconstructed and reimagined in a way that it's not set in stone. You feel me? So I'm all about prioritizing healing, restorative justice, building a community of acceptance, support, celebrating intersectionality and diversity, and putting those directly impacted by the prison industrial complex, by the different systems of oppression at the forefront of creating and manifesting what is needed to support the folks who are impacted, from these communities. And also, I get a little pushback from what I'm gonna say right here, because I open up by saying I know a lot of people's hearts in the right place. You feel me? But there needs to be awareness and addressing the harm that's being done to marginalized communities by folks who come from a more privileged background, and they may be, seeking to make a change. But the ways in which they're doing it and the forms of activism that they're taking actually tokenizes the people who are oppressed by the prison industrial complex. And I'll give you some examples. Academics, for example. There's academics who have no lived experience being in the prison industrial complex or the carceral society or any impacts, and they are the ones who are doing research, trying to obtain this data, trying to have some type of tangible evidence to push their idea of what changes need to be made in the prison industrial complex. But they don't have someone with actual lived experience leading these research projects. How are you gonna advocate for the needs of a community if you're not having them actively in the whole process, who are actually impacted by these research studies and by, what they're seeking to, form? And then another one is, I'm an artist, and I kind of feel really like deep about this one, that it kind of hurts me, because I know people, again, good intentions, going into correctional facilities and doing art with incarcerated people. But then they go on to create art and sell books and capitalize off of the trauma that inspired them, and kind of just left them and just tokenized them and exploited them the same way. But in their minds, they may be thinking, I'm raising awareness, I'm, doing this. But in reality, as someone who has lived it through all this, it's re-traumatizing us and exploiting us. We need to have our voices amplified. We need to be at the forefront. We need to be in these spaces and actually valued for our input, and another thing that I was saying is really we need to transform how people are working with us within these spaces, working with us on, either projects or different things, or abolition, or addressing, the prison industrial complex. We don't need saviors. We don't need white saviors, don't need privileged saviors. We don't need people to be our voice. We have a voice. How I see, and it hurts me, that when people, if we're not at the forefront of these issues and discussing the things, people don't realize that they are contributing to basically this narrative that people who are formerly incarcerated or system impacted, like we're second-class citizens, like we can't manifest change or create change with our own lived experiences, like we need somebody to open the door for us, which that's partially true because you need allies and people in spaces that we can't get in. But that's when they open it and say, we step in the door. We are at the forefront. We don't need someone to go in there and be like, look, I'm a liaison, I can speak to them. We have our own voice. That is what I've seen in a lot of spaces that we're lacking, is our voices being highlighted and amplified. And really, I always like go in these spaces and I get a history of different things and that, and it's stuff that we know and things that it's good to share and stuff, but we really need to be focused on putting people who have this experience in the forefront of what's going on, and also building, social capital amongst each other and bonding and bridging between our communities, but in ways that are creating like a interwoven social fabric that's stronger, and not like, yo, I'm gonna exploit you because I need this clout. I'm trying to get my name out there. I'm trying to publish this paper. No, we are done with that. When we are pushing to take back our stories and our lived experiences and no longer be tokenized for it. And that's what we're, as myself and, in different chapters, Flacco's doing on his campus as well, and what he's doing in his life as well, and another, I'm trying to, be fast here. I'm gonna go back on police. We don't need police. Police are causing more harm. They're contributing to more harm. We need community resources. We need financial support to student orgs, student-led leadership, celebrating diversity, intersectionality, cultural competency. And then we need community education programs that aren't held by the university as the gatekeepers. And I'm talking about financial literacy. I'm talking about teaching the youth how to care for themselves, whether it be mental health, physical health, emotional health, seeking therapy, destigmatizing, advocating for themselves and being in these spaces, and then access to like journals, like, so that people are actually reading this critical theory, these thoughts, these other things outside of this bubble that they're just in. And we are so in a bubble being locked up. We don't go to regular school. We go to continuation school. We are literally broken down in our identities over and over. And since we are children, and we're just, and then my whole thing is like, okay, the university itself upholds the prison industrial complex. The university creates jobs. It creates people's dreams and aspirations. It contributes to upholding this capitalistic society because people are working within these spaces to go into the same reproduction of social wealth and social power. It's the same fucking thing, just wrapped up in a pretty bow, all part of a big carceral society. We need to rethink what getting an education means. And I'm not talking, not just working within the university, because I'm all up in these university spaces, and I just see the harm that's just being redone in different, and that's why I'm saying, like, I don't want to like demonize people like, oh, you're not doing it right or something. Like, I'm just like, look, this is the expression and lived experiences. And if you really want to, rock with us, like rock with us, not like for us. Like, I don't know if that makes sense. Like, you got to rock with us, solidarity. Like I said, we have our own voices, you feel me? And so with that, what I was saying with community educational programs and, also, teaching children or like, youth or people who are impacted, because also young adults or adults, how to form positive interpersonal relationships. We literally grow up just off the language of violence because we just know how to survive. We don't even know how to, most of us, form these positive interpersonal relationships, so getting an education isn't just going to university. There's some street knowledge. There's shit I've learned in the streets that no university and no book could ever teach me. So really begin to reimagine what it is to get an education. And like someone said in the beginning, they were saying, having to work within, like doing abolition work within these spaces and getting the pushback on the different levels. Exactly. That's exactly what it is, because they don't want to give us this knowledge. Like y'all have heard this so many times. The oppressor will not give us the tools to dismantle their house. You feel me? We really got, and that's the one beautiful thing about being in these spaces, that, you know, meeting other people, that like-minded people with the good intentions. And that's how we begin to form those communities, and working outside of the structures that are in place to keep us oppressed and keep us disenfranchised and keep us divided. Like Flacco said, you know, we really need to come together and really, my whole thing is put the people who got the lived experience in the forefront, amplify our voices, tell us, you know, ask us what the needs are and how people can support and stuff, you know, and also most importantly, advocate to the communities that y'all resonate with. You know, some people from communities that I can't get in, they're gonna take one look at me and be scared. You feel me? Be like, look, you know, if we're really going to change the narrative and change hearts and minds and move forward on this, people need to start humanizing us and start seeing us as people who have been traumatized. And then, you know, not even just traumatized by the system, traumatized by our families, traumatized by our communities, ancestral trauma. Like, we really need to, and this leads into my last point that I want to make, that in a lot of spaces, I feel like this lacks, and it's addressing and healing the wound that has been done onto us in the very first, in our ancestors who had literally died, you know, to have this whole inception of this country, really to not only just address and start to heal the wound, but make aware of it. It is like aware that there is a wound that these systems have put us through, that all these traumas have put us through, that colonization has put us through, and how we begin to heal that wound. Because I know I'm gonna get real, like, I love the Hunger Games. I don't know if y'all ever seen it, but like at the end of it, they just traded one oppressor for the next. But homegirl ended up killing that lady. President Coin. I always use this little analogy because it's like, if you're not healing the wound and you're not addressing what the fuck is wrong in the first place, you're just gonna trade another dictator for the next. We're just gonna be how we've been doing it. If we're really going to imagine radical change and manifest radical change, we need to start thinking uncomfortable thoughts, thinking things and reimagining things that we've never thought of before. And I know a lot of it is people don't want to give up their comfortability. People are scared. We're living in very volatile times. It is, but then you got to think about people who are living this every day, and we don't have a choice. We don't get to choose comfortability. And we have to literally re-traumatize ourselves just to advocate for others not to go through this shit. But yeah, so I don't want to take up too much time. If y'all want to like tap in with us, you can add us on like Instagram, Underground Scholars UCSC. And yeah, thank you all putting this on, you know, keep it going. And yeah, right on, y'all. Much love.
Thank you so much, MJ. We appreciate you so much. That was powerful. And so that's what the Underground Scholars is up to in the UC. And, you know, that was incredible. And we appreciate this platform to share this. And also, you know, we're pushing hard. And if you want to join us in this push, reach out. Let's organize every state. You know, I put an article up there that came from one of the co-founders that's really pushing policy, you know, possibilities, and read that article because we're fighting to turn these possibilities into realities for our communities. And that's all I got to say. Thank you, Lucy, and thank you everyone for your labor and everything, you know what I'm saying, that went into this presentation right here.
Yeah, I'm at a loss for words. That was amazing. Thank you, Flacco, Albert, MJ. You gave us so much to think about. So I think this is the part where we're going to cut the recording and have a discussion with everyone.